Welcome. Thank you everyone who decided to join today's session on driving insights to action. We've got something a little different for you today. We've got a fantastic trio of seasoned customer experience professionals who have been there and done that. This group has 65 years of CX experience with all the battle scars and accomplishments which you'd expect. We've worked as practitioners within large and medium organizations. We've consulted with companies in almost all industries and engaged with senior leadership, frontline staff, and everyone in between. Let me introduce my colleagues, Diane Majors, who is a strategic advisor here at Macquarium, but many of you likely know her as the previous CXO of the Customer Experience Professionals Association, or CXPA. I'd also like to introduce Jim Bass, who is our Director of Experience Management at Macquarium. Jim's a longtime practitioner of CX best practices at scale, having worked at McKesson, ADP, and with Verizon. And I'm Brett Sharp, VP of Experience Management. I spent the early part of my career in data, insights, and customer research consultation. And for the past 15 years, have transitioned more to CX strategy and implementation. As CX professionals, we often hear about how to gather data, but we've seen that many companies are challenged by turning volumes of data into insights, struggle with defining the right actions to take based on those insights, have difficulty prioritizing the right investments that will have the most impact, and poorly communicate across the organization about the value of taking a holistic approach to defining experience. So in today's session, some best practice examples of how to convert data into the right action, discuss how insight generation and design are critical skills for which we should all possess, provide tactical techniques you can use to improve communication across your organization, and show how a planned approach can help you gain traction and investment in CX by focusing on an insights-driven business case for executive buy-in. We're excited and hopeful that you'll learn from experiences on how to, as we share various techniques and examples. So to start off, take a brief moment and reflect on your personal situation or consider your company and ask yourself some critical or provocative questions. Are you drowning in data? Are you gathering, storing, and sharing the right data? Does the dashboard really tell the human side of the story? Are executives focused on scores only and not the experience or the impact? Are the insights you're sharing being overlooked or ignored? What really stands in the way of using the information you have at your disposal today to really drive change within your organization? Well, rest assured, everyone struggles with this. So let's now transition to Diane to have her set the stage and share some stories of how best-in-class brands tackle these challenges.
Hey, thanks, Brett. That was great introduction and how organizations are really struggling with this critical talent. We want to really challenge you today to think differently about how you're leveraging the data and insights. What are you doing with the data and analytics? Are you simply pushing it out to the organization and hoping that they'll do something with it? Or are you really escorting that data and taking it to the teams, working with them to generate the right insights to action? Are you finding the right problem to solve? Much of the data and analytics that we have point us in the right direction, but there's often multiple causes of opportunities in the organization. That's where insights to action comes into play. So insight generation and the ability to take those insights and move them to action is a skill set that needs to exist in an organization. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But what I want you to think about is it's really about defining what an insight is. So if you were to go across to many different people in your organization and ask them how they would define insights, you'll probably get a lot of different answers. So we've pulled one example here of thinking about what an insight is. It's the capacity to take a true but often hidden complex situation and realize a fresh and unexpected perspective, enabling you to solve a human problem. Now, there's a lot of components to that. If you look at taking something that's a big rock, I always call it, a very complex situation, and trying to break it down to something that really allows that light bulb to come on in your organization's brains, and that really helps to solve the human need. So we're really going to focus on the difference between what and the action and the why. So if you think about all the data that you have, the first thing that you want to ask is, so what? So we might know the top 5 drivers of dissatisfaction for our customers. So what do we do about them? And then what now? So moving people to action. So simply making statements and pausing to ask the organization what needs to happen is where you are. So this is where you kind of start also the business impact question. I'll give you an example of this. Haggerty Insurance, which is an insurance company that insures antique and classic cars, was struggled because one of the things that they knew from their data and analytics was that it was difficult to renew your premium, your insurance policy. So when they had that opportunity, they didn't quite know what to do about it. That seems to be a big issue, but there were a lot of root causes to that problem. So they used a technique called what, why, how laddering. And it's simply saying, if I look at what is happening and I start to really ask the why, and I continue to ask the why of that particular opportunity, I'm going to come up with things like, hey, they haven't been told how to renew, or there's not an auto renew opportunity for the customer to actually let it auto renew. Continually to break that down. But then for each one of those opportunities, once they identified the top 3, they were able to then say, okay, now that we have the why, what are the actions? How can we take actions against that? So it's a great way and a very simple technique to break down that big rock into smaller things so you can identify which of these things would be easiest and most help the customer meet the need that they're after. So that's a great example of it. We also have ways to really start to think about kind of this 3-stage process: reframing, storming and mining, and harvesting. So I want you to think about reframing as a different way to think about a problem or a different way to really ask questions. I'll give you an example of that. If you think about Disney, when they started looking at the lines in their theme parks, it wasn't how do we make the wait time shorter. They asked the question, what can we do to entertain our guests while they're standing in line? So it was one way for them to say, if we can't do anything about the line because of the throughput, we certainly can put in kiosks that have entertainment and activities. We can have videos playing of the ride. We can have a pre-ride picture taking session. We can do selfies. So they started to really come up with ways to put more engagement within that organization. So that's an example of just reframing a problem. The insight storm and mining is really about the why. Why does it matter? How does it make someone feel? So we're really then trying to get a lot more opportunities to come out, much like the what, why, how laddering. So that's a point where, for example, Nintendo discovered that 15 to 35-year-old women don't really play on game consoles. So they started to ask the questions and really brainstormed around what was happening and began to understand why people were motivated the way they do, what they really wanted out of being able to play games, not just play on a console for Nintendo, but what did they want to be entertained with, and started to really brainstorm and mine some of the things that would come out of that. And they solved the problem by kind of drilling down into this is what, with their customers coming in and telling them what they really wanted. So it was a great way for them to kind of get all those ideas out on the table. And then harvesting is finding the right action and impact. So this is where you start to balance the business impact with customer needs. You start to look at, is the value we're going to create for the customer and the investment we're going to make in this particular change and the benefit we get out of it, how do those two things matter? And so that's where the prioritization starts to happen. What is one of the solutions that solves the human need but balances both of those things? So you can see how even a good insight can set the direction for an entire company. So while we think about these big companies who've been around for a long time, Uber's a great example of, they didn't actually start with saying we're going to disrupt the taxi industry. Certainly that was a goal, but it didn't tell them why and what they needed to do. They were more concerned with generating what are the needs that the human has and how can we best solve those. So I don't want to have to get out my credit card. I want to know where my car is. Is it on its way? I want to know how long it's going to take me to get to my destination. So they began with really generating insights around what people wanted out of getting from point A to point B. So that's a great example of starting with an insight to kick off a new product or a new solution. Lots of organizations have tackled this also by actually bringing many of the members of the employees of the organization in and kind of teaching this skill set. So it's a little bit like at AT&T, we had the care center reps go into the retail stores and work with them for a day. And vice versa. We had the retail store clerks go into the care center and listen to calls. So it was also about getting the organization to understand that there are light bulbs coming on when you do that, to let people really understand not just what's happening where they are, but how can they get insights and more information about what's happening in other parts of the organization. So this is really about leaning in and learning these skills along with your data analytics team, but also with the rest of the organization to really think about this as a tool in your toolkit that the organization needs. So 3 things, I think, go to your organization and really uncover what does an insight really mean to the organization and come to a good definition. Look at insight generation as part of the design toolkit using data. And then engage and create new skills, a toolbox, and new capabilities for your organization. Be purposeful about how you're going to do that. So Jim, I know you have some stories to share as well about how to engage the organization to drive action. Can you give us some examples?
Yes, thanks, Diane. Appreciate that, setting the stage there with those great examples. When I was a practitioner at McKesson and at ADP, I learned that no matter how data-driven an organization was, driving insights into action is not an easy task. I learned the hard way that just sharing insights alone was not going to create action. To get leaders to seriously consider taking action, I needed to get their attention by connecting the insights to their purse strings as well as their heartstrings. To connect to the purse strings, start by focusing on the top 1 to 3 key insights that, if acted upon, would have the most impact on the goals and metrics that the leaders are already working to achieve. Enhance that insight by describing it in terms of the impact it would have on financial results like cost, revenue, or profit, or on key metrics like retention, NPS, or CSAT. I used this technique when I was at McKesson. We had a common complaint that resulted in a lengthy service engagement. And no matter how many times we heard this through our customers in the relationship survey and escalations, we couldn't get the business to address it. But then I found a way to get their attention. I showed that each service ticket cost a support and service organization $400 every time it happened. And this problem occurred 500 times a year. So let's do the math. If we fixed the problem, we would save $200,000 every year. We'd avoid escalations and we'd alleviate that customer frustration. Very quickly, it became a no-brainer for our leaders to take action. And guess what? They asked me to find more scenarios like that one so they could continue to impact the business results. So when you think about it, we're looking at left brain and right brain. Everyone is different, and so we have to make sure we address both the business and the human aspects of the experience. Sometimes connecting the insight to financials and metrics is not enough, and sometimes not even possible. To connect to the heartstrings, get leaders' attention by humanizing the insight. Identify the customers who are experiencing the scenario and create an insight story through their lens of their experience. Make it real, make it human, put a face on it. Include the names of the customer and the value they bring. I used this technique when I was at ADP, and it really got leaders' attention and also the attention of the business managers. I created a real-time customer journey of our new customers who are promoters. Each month, I shared their experience from implementation to their first service experience, to their first payroll experience, to the first account management experience, and on and on. At the top of each slide, I included the customer's name and the annual value that they brought. This really got the business leaders' attention, and it really helped them focus on working outside of their silos to solve a problem. Another way to bring the heartstrings into play for our business leaders is to personalize the insight. That is, tell the insight story by comparing it to an experience in a different industry, like a restaurant, healthcare, hotel, etc. At McKesson and ADP, we had scenarios where our service and support teams couldn't relate to anticipating a customer need during their engagements. So what I did is I related it to a restaurant scenario where a waiter was anticipating needs like filling a water glass or bringing napkins or even bringing the check before it was asked for. Another way to personalize the insight is to tell that insight story through the lens of a loved one like your mother. How would your mother feel if this situation happened to her? Or how would my mother react if she was in this scenario? So you're probably thinking, this all sounds great, but how can I get started? Well, there are 3 things that you can do today, and it's just write 3 simple sentences. Start off with a sentence for that one key insight and connect it to the financial impact, whether it be cost, profit, or to a business metric like NPS or CSAT. Your next sentence would be around humanizing the insight. So one sentence that really tells that insight story from the viewpoint of a specific customer. Include their name and the annual value that they bring. Make it super easy, a simple sentence. Maybe add a bullet or 2 if it helps. And then your third sentence is around personalizing the insight. So again, tell that story through one sentence and relate it to another industry like a healthcare or a restaurant, or from the aspect of your mother and if the problem happened to her. Do these 3 things and you'll be well on your way to begin moving insight into action. All right, so Brett, you have experience at Athena Health. Can you share that regardless of your position in the organization, that everyone can be thinking about insights and moving them to action and solving from different perspectives?
Thanks, Jim. Love the examples you shared because it's exactly the same perspective. So for my 3 actions, they all relate to looking at things from various perspectives or different lenses. So my first one is insights are everywhere. No matter where you are in your career, what level of CX maturity your company has, insight opportunities exist every day throughout. But relevant insights are the critical foundation. Excuse me. Our job as CX professionals is to help leadership understand the impact of experienced problems, enable them to manage how those actions get, or how actions get prioritized to solve for those, and to convince them with insights to commit to taking that action that we're recommending. So for example, at Athena Health, this was a constant challenge as the healthcare IT industry moves fast. Executives make major decisions quickly and often with little verified data. So how could we guide them to invest in the right things? One of the major components was to create an enterprise-wide taxonomy, a single customer-centric language that all departments shared, coded to, categorized, and shared across all their other departments. That taxonomy gave us insights up and down the ecosystem. It told us what customers' pain points were dealing with. It told us how employees were talking to and understanding and diagnosing those problems. It helped us to determine the number of touch points a customer would have across the, and it really helped to see how things moved up and downstream as they were supposed to or as they were an exception. So based on that, we were able to reduce the number of handoffs, reduce the customer feedback codes. We went from 2,000, I think, to about 200, which is, pretty sizable. We were able to link direct service tickets to new feature enhancements being developed that would solve for those. And also we were able to really look at how our email communications could actually drive better, more relevant customer engagements. So it's easy to convince executives what's important to invest in when they see the impact across the entire business, across multiple departments, and are really helping to reduce the cost and improve the experience. So my action is to really focus on connecting the insights across the customer journey and look at how is it affecting things upstream, downstream, and across the departments. My second one is really insights must be useful. In other words, shared at the right time, in the right place, with the right insight. Insights are only as good as the data, and they're also only good as how we're telling the right folks about that data. So they've got to address the right question. So again, when I was at Athena Health, we had a perceived churn problem that was identified by our finance, our executive, and our customer success teams. We were asked to solve for the churn issue and effectively failed at getting executives to commit to our recommendations. Why? Well, after several months more of digging deeper into the root cause, we found the real issue was one of an ineffective onboarding process. During our onboarding, many customers didn't really get it and understand how the system would work for their business versus the way they were working today. What we failed to do during the onboarding, our churn analysis, was to ask the right question. It wasn't, why are customers struggling with and are leaving us now? The real question was, did customers ever feel comfortable or confident that our system was delivering value to them and makes their life better? Our data wasn't actionable as our scope was too narrow. So what we really found out was, let's ask the right question, which is, what's the upstream effect? What's the root cause? And what got them to this place to begin with? If we're asking the right question, if we're asking the provocative questions, and we're looking at that in every meeting, we'll work on finding the right solutions and the root causes. So my third one is really to communicate in outcomes and actions for customers, both internally and externally. Jim, Diane, and I have all shared stories about the importance of customer language. While we need to speak the language of our audience, we also need to phrase our insights as clear actions to take and outcomes we desire to achieve. By asking the provocative questions, by expanding our perspective or looking in different lenses, and by looking at the challenge through others' perspectives, we can ensure insights are relevant, useful, and compelling to executive leadership and explain to them why to invest. So my recommendation and the action that you can take today is to speak the language of who you're talking to and who you're trying to convince. CMOs have very different language than your finance executives, which are very different than your customer success and your frontline staff. Phrase the insights in terms of how the action that they need to take will make a difference, or how there's a desired outcome that we want customers to achieve. If we're able to share the insights that way, they can internalize it and see how it affects their day-to-day. And it really helps them solve their problem, makes them look good, and they're more likely to achieve and implement that insight. So Diane, what are some other stories of how companies have put some humanity, personalization, and better insights into their process?
Oh, great question. So we can think of some of the best brands today that are doing experience very well are actually bringing that personalization to a whole new level. Bringing in customers. So Airbnb, this is a great example of all the people in this room are customers of Airbnb or potential customers. And this co-creation, or they call it participatory design, is a way to actually bring those customers right into what you're trying to accomplish, and not just the data, but what are the needs that they have. Again, back to, we've got a lot of data that tells us the what, but we want the why and what the human need is to solve for. So this approach really creates a sense of urgency and passion, and really shows how the brand can fit into the customer's lives. What do they need, and why is it valuable? How much personalization do they want? Where does it become kind of that creepy factor? So it's oftentimes not just about what the product or service is, but also how they want to be communicated to, what they feel is what the brand should be doing differently, or what they should be doing better, or what they should stop doing. So those insights also come from the outside. It's not just about a survey and about behavioral data. It's also that psychological impact and the emotional impact that you're having. So that's an example of how Airbnb does it as well. I think another way to really think through this is about how you think about this as a new skill. So I talked about this very briefly, but let me give you an example of some ways that you can actually make this part of how you're growing your own profession. There are several organizations out there who specialize in design thinking or insight generation techniques. So if you think about Luma Institute, L-U-M-A Institute, or IDEO, I-D-E-O, many of them have techniques that are very easy to download that you can try with no risk. They don't take a lot of facilitation. The step-by-steps are there. Looking for those tools in your toolkit that can really help you when you have something that you need to really drill into. How are you going to use that humanization? What's the technique you can use? So think about that as part of your new skill. There are things like a creative matrix. It's basically taking a matrix on the wall and putting down one side, here's the maybe generations that will be interacting with an app. And across the top, themes from what they want to do. And you just start creating for this particular generation and this part of the app, what are some ideas that we have? So there's lots of just really quick and easy ways to really begin to drill into the organization. It's also about this storytelling. So the other skill that I would offer you, as Jim pointed out very, very briefly, is it is all about making that connection and helping people to understand, as Brett said, that what you're trying to accomplish really can help the organization move forward. It can help each business unit move forward. It can help each individual move forward, not just by helping the organization, but also learning new skills. Everybody wants to learn, everybody wants to contribute. So it's a great way to really engage the organization. This kind of goes in, as we talk about CX professionals, into the culture shift. This is how you get people to work and think differently about insights, not just the data and going and fixing something, but really drilling into the right thing. It's also about creating a process in your discipline that you're trying to build in the organization. So you probably have a process for how the surveys get analyzed and where the information goes and how you present dashboards and your quarterly report to your senior executives. Where is the insight to action part of that process? Do you actually have it defined? Once you define it and you begin to fill it with those tools, you'll find that you'll move out of that, hey, we get a lot of data, but we don't know what to do with it. Data rich, insights poor. Many organizations face that today. Helping this skill, going from insights to action, is where you can start to have a more major impact on what you're doing in your organization and really start to integrate and orchestrate how your brand responds to data. Working sessions with cross-functional teams, for example. It is a shift. And so building your process out and the tools you're going to need for that is important. The next thing that I would encourage you to do is create a space to be creative. Rackspace, who's based in Austin, had the luxury of actually moving into an old mall, so they had lots of room. But what they wanted to do is really create a space and a time for people to be innovative and have these insights and be creative. So they created these Racktivity rooms, is what they're called, and they're spaces that have not kind of open rooms, if you will, but it's a space where if you have a customer, an employee, or partner opportunity that you're trying to solve for, that you can actually go in and they have all these tools, they have the sticky notes, they have all the techniques kind of lined up on the wall, they have these exercise cards, and you can actually schedule time with a designer or a CX person to come in and help facilitate and work through your opportunity. So this allowed them, people, the time and effort and space. They also allowed, they had great communication with all of the leaders saying, we need people to have time and space to work on these insights. So it was also about bringing the leadership along to make sure that they understood, why is this person taking 2 hours out of their day to go to a meeting like this? We helped them tell the importance. And that also was based on the business action, right? We're trying to help the organization achieve the business goals. This is part of that process and where to go. What if you don't? What if you don't? So many organizations, if I say kind of what if you weren't taking the insights, the data to insights? What if you weren't taking insights to the right action to solve? There's also a scenario of saying, if we don't use this information, we're spending a lot of money to get the data. We should be using it to really drive return on investment of that information. So it's very critical for you to think about the business case behind you as a CX leader and how you're bringing your organization along to achieve measurable impacts, much like Brett and Jim shared. Now's the time for disruption. There's no time in our history where CX wasn't needed more than it is today. Human needs are changing. The struggles that they're running into, the obstacles, what an organization does right now is critical. So we'll think about how to go from fixes to future experiences and really starting to think about design. But I want you to think about, again, that financial impact of the business case. It's not just about the scores, trying to move Net Promoter. It's really about how you measure a reduction in website, an increase in website visits, a reduction in calls by call center, better upsell, cross-sell. Are you really bringing that to bear so that you can ensure it can be tracked and implemented in your action? So this is one of the other activities that you need to look at, is when you launch an action around the experience, are you taking a baseline? Do you have a business case that you've built? And are you going back and helping people to realize the benefits that you've created out of it? Truly the value. So it's not just getting to the right insight and action, but it's also telling that story afterwards. But we also want to encourage you to make sure, as Jim brought up, to keep those stories human. Focus on the stories, not just calculations or scores. Numbers give us credibility, even the financial numbers, but stories really move people to action. So I would also encourage you, as one of your other action steps, is to go take a course in learn storytelling. It is a skill set and competency, and we want people to be able to really bring, motivate, and track that action related to what insight they get out of their data. All right. So if we think about one more tool we want to give to you, is thinking about when I talked about what is an insight and how do you know, this is just a simple list of questions that if you're trying to take the data and go to an insight should answer these questions. Does it provide a new and unexpected perspective on the problem? Does it open a multitude of new opportunities and lead to new thought and ideas of what could be, the art of the possible, we call it? So this is just kind of a checklist to say, did we in fact get to an insight, or are we just thinking about it as a data, as a problem? It's just an opportunity. So we wanted to give you that as just one of your toolkits and one of your things you can go do tomorrow. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jim for us to wrap up and review those action steps.
Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Brett. As you said, now is the time for disruption. So let's do it by driving insights into action. Thank you for letting us share our experience with you today. We want to take this closing moment to encourage you to start driving insights into action today by executing at least 3 of the activities we described. And if you'd like copies of key takeaways, next steps, or any of the techniques that we shared, just send me an email at jim.bass@macquarium.com. The CX team at Macquarium wishes you all the best, and we hope you'll let us know if you want to talk further. We're here to help you. Thanks again.